Good evening, virtual visitors. My name is Naya Hardaway, and I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for the African American History Initiative here at the Missouri Historical Society. Welcome to our program, and thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you also to our members, donors, and supporters from the Zoo Museum Tax District. Welcome to our Understanding Infant and Maternal Mortality program tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Ms. Laura Gully, who will kick off our program tonight. Laura Gully is Director of Community Mobilization and Advocacy with Generate Health St. Louis. Ms. Gully has extensive experience building broad-based community collaborations and support for the needs of women, children, and families affected by health and racial disparities. Mrs. Gully has a diverse blend of designing and implementing community engagement efforts that center community voices and builds peer leadership capacity to accelerate systemic community change. Tonight's program will run for about 90 minutes, the program for which will be included in the chat. Please, for your convenience, submit questions through the Q&A button in your toolbar, and in order to streamline the process, we would prefer that you wait until the end to ask your questions. Please know that we will do our best to answer all questions, but we may not have time to get to everyone. We are proud to partner with Flourish and Generate Health, Mrs. Laura, Candace, and Mia. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Mrs. Laura Gully.
Thank you, Naya. Thank you for those kind words and welcoming remarks. I just want to welcome folks into the space tonight. You are in for a special treat. Thank you for giving your time and being with us to address this important topic. I would like to certainly welcome. I am on a stage with two dynamic ladies, Mia Doherty and Candace Ward, who you will hear from later on in this presentation. And I just say, hang on for the ride. So next slide, please. And the next slide. So what you will hear today, if you have any questions, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to have a conversation, y'all. We are going to have a conversation about the status of the health of moms and babies in our region here in St. Louis. We're going to provide you with an overview of infant and maternal health trends so that you get a sense of what is transpired. How did we get here? We'll talk a little bit about some of the factors that attributed to Black maternal and child health in our region. We will talk about how do we begin to move from mortality to vitality and highlight efforts that are going on through a community-led initiative. We'll also highlight what's working around doulas and how they're helping to really drive improve birth experiences and birth outcomes for Black families. So next slide, please. So what I want you to hear is nothing new. We're sounding the alarm that babies are dying in our region. I hope you hear that call. We live in a region that has some of the world-renowned medical centers that care for our community, and yet we have babies that are dying. Next slide, please. Just to provide a little level set, that infant mortality, when we talk about infant mortality, what we're talking about is the number of babies that die before their first birthday. We'd like to think that infant mortality is like a canary in the coal mine. It tells us and signals to us how we're doing as a community, how well we're treating our most vulnerable, and as a region, how are we faring? We'll talk about that. Next slide, please. We'll also talk about maternal mortality and morbidity, which is simply the number of women who die during pregnancy, childbirth, and during the postpartum period following pregnancy. In the United States, we lose 700 to 900 women each year during those critical periods. Next slide, please. We know that healthy women, the healthier a woman is, the healthier a baby is. So we want to focus in that area. The slide that you see in front of you highlights that some concepts that I wanted to share with you: equality, equity, and justice. So in the first slide, you see everybody wants to see the game. When we talk about equality, we're talking about some of the underlying assumptions is everyone benefits from the same support. If everybody gets the same thing, they'll be all right. But as you can see, everybody can't see the game. So moving to how do we achieve equity? It's like providing folks the supports that they need. And research has long shown that the damage that is done because of discrimination and what that does for individuals, it hurts our health and prospective of being well, our well-being. And it shortens our life. But how do we then remove those barriers? And as you move into the third slide around justice, it's removing those barriers so that you don't have to provide those supports and accommodations because of the inequities that are addressed at the systemic level. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about health equity and racial equity, that you can no longer look at data and predict outcomes based on your race. Next slide, please. Some of the social determinants of health. When we talk about the social determinants of health, we're talking about the conditions in which people are born, live, grow, and work. They have, as you can see, there's economic factors that impact everything from education, where you live, your neighborhood, your job status, incomes, your social supports, and even the physical environment, to what you eat, what drinking, what you drink, what you smoke, and accessing healthcare. All of those things making up our overall health and well-being. And what we know is that only 20% of our health is attributable to the moments we spend in healthcare. So what does that say? That creates us looking at other opportunities to be healthy and well. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little sense of where we're coming from, you see the infant mortality rate in our country overall was going down. That trend is going down from 12.8 to 5.87. And that represented over 22,000 babies that were dying each year compared to developed countries. And in some developing countries, I don't want you to start celebrating because that number is going down, because as the United States being one of those developed countries, we rank 33 out of 36 of those countries. Not too well, if you want to say it. So, next slide. If we break that down even further and look at infant mortality by race, it tells an even troubling story. First, we notice infant mortality going down and declining for both races. However, that gap between Black and white babies dying persists. And that is not acceptable in our region, even in our country. So next slide, as we look at what's happening here in the St. Louis region, we lose enough babies to fill 13 kindergarten classrooms each year. Think about this for a moment. This is the lost potential that we're talking about. Imagine you in kindergarten or your children in kindergarten. That lost potential that we never see reach their full potential. Next slide, please. Out of those 13 kindergarten classrooms, 8 of those are Black kindergarten classrooms. 8 of those kindergarten classrooms are Black children. So what are we talking about? That's what we talk about, the gap, the disparity. Next slide, please. We can look at this, and despite many of our health, advances and things that have really helped support our communities and improve, we still see the gap between Black and white babies growing. Over time, since 1970, we've seen an increase. And that increase is 2.5 to 3 times that of white babies for Black babies that would experience that burden. Next slide, please. So I'm so glad you asked why. Why are Black babies dying at such high rates in our region when we have such wonderful health care and opportunities? We point to a lot of things. The pervasive trauma, violence, and toxic stress that are impacting Black women, plus the compounding environmental stress and the healthcare system bias that many Black women experience that can be attributed to those stressors. Folks, our bodies keep the score of all of those micro and macro aggressions. And we want to talk about what we can do to address them. But before we do, next slide, I do want to talk a little bit about what we see around maternal mortality. That across our country, we're seeing this uptick in a rise in maternal mortality. And those trends for our region do not look well. For the state of Missouri, there are only 6 other states that have higher rates of maternal mortality than Missouri. That's not a banner that we want to carry. Next slide. If you look at this at the more localized level across our state, you see that the infant or the maternal mortality rate is not where we want it to be. And we, across all of the 3 major cities here in our region, you can see where we rank. Next slide. And if we break that down even further by race, again, Black women are experiencing a large burden of that, almost nearly 3 times that of their white counterparts. So again, you might be asking the question, why? Next slide. We have Black women that can earn a salary of $250,000 a year and have worse birth outcomes than a white woman without a high school diploma. So even attributing the wealth and the education is not a buffer for having poor outcomes. So what are we pointing to? Next slide. We cannot have this conversation without talking about our history. I love this slide by way of understanding what James Baldwin recommends. He says, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it with us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. We know there's racism in the United States, and it's pervasive. And it's the experience of what it means to be Black in America that creates toxic stress. And as a result of that is racism and inequalities. Next slide, please. So the realities of our American history is that there's still a lot of baggage and unfinished business that we have to disrupt, that are disrupting the lives of African American women today. What happened in those on those slave markets that you see in this picture behind you, behind the slide here, is the mistreating of what Black women experience up until today. Next slide. I'd like to just elevate a few significant historical events, because this slide kind of breaks things down into 4 kind of key areas that play a significant role in some of the health outcomes that we're seeing today, including slavery, which covered an extensive period of time, Black codes or the Jim Crow period, and then civil rights and the post-civil rights area up to present day. This timeline covers over 400 years. And if you notice, all of these experiences, they continue into contemporary today. So things like laws that define enslaved enslaved women as property, Black women being raped for sexual pleasure and economic gain, that childbearing during slavery were intrinsically related to an economic system that benefited white slave owners versus personal freedom. Now, what about the non-consensual medical experiments that were done on Black women? These things were performed, the surgeries without anesthesia, just for learning purposes. Now, moving forward, poor or no health care for impoverished Black people. Sterilization, Jim Crow. So we can go on and on. These things impact our health today. And so you ask again, why? This is part of our bodies keeping store. Next slide. Black women recall delivering their babies in the basements of local health institutions. It's not long ago. Matter of fact, many women talk about it's not a generation ago that this occurred. And many of those experiences are carried on from tradition to tradition, generation to generation, and that there continues to be racial bias in our medical care system that puts women's lives at risk. Next slide. I remember facilitating community listening sessions where we asked women, what would it take for us to have healthy, thriving babies and communities? And some of the things that they talked about were feeling unseen, that they were routinely mishandled or handled abrasively. Denied pain medicine is one of the more common challenges, that staff openly questioned their ability to pay and that was contingent on how they were treated. So those experiences create stressors in an environment where you're at your most vulnerable. You're in need of health care. Next slide. So let's be clear. Race is not the risk, but it's racism that's the risk factor. So when we talk about racial disparities, they're not natural, right? We're talking about deficiencies in the systems that are not serving or not providing access, or necessary access to women and Black women. So in order for Black women or birthing people and our babies to thrive, systems must equally work well and support all families if we are to achieve health equity. Next slide. I have the privilege and honor of introducing to you Mia Doherty, who is a community leader and advocate. Before I do, though, I want to share just really quickly a little bit about, just to give you a little context for how I came to know Miss Mia. And if you go to the next slide, you can come back to Miss Mia real quick. But I want to just talk a little bit about Flourish. Flourish St. Louis is a community-led initiative that is bringing our region together in different ways. That it has this vision of babies thriving and flourishing. That's a very different vision, and it is community-led and driven by those that have experienced some of the inequities and disparities that I've previously talked about. And so as you move into the next slide, Generate Health is the backbone organization that leads this effort. It's the organization that I have the pleasure of working with. But we also collectively look at how do we utilize and support communities' voices, those that have that lived experience, to achieve a different outcome, Because I tell you, if we continue, and research shows us, if we continue to do what we're currently doing, the black-white gap of infant mortality, we will not achieve parity until the year 2060. Not acceptable. So what Flourish did is set a bold goal. We said we want to achieve zero racial disparities. That gap is minimized to zero of infant mortality by the year 2033. Now, it's not that far off if you look around the corner, but this simply means that there will be 75 more Black babies that will be celebrating their birthday, their first birthday. Yes, we can do that. So back to Miss Mia. I wanted to set the stage because at the table are a group of dynamic community leaders that are sharing and driving what Flourish focuses on, helping to inform what we do. And so Mia is a dynamic community activist who is a member of our inaugural Community Leaders Cabinet. She co-leads a consulting business where she co-facilitates a consumer advisory group, helping them inform and reimagine culturally congruent home visitation services for Black women. And she is a proud mom to a 5, almost 6-year-old Miss Zara. So please join me in welcoming Miss Mia.
Thank you, Laura, for that warm welcoming. As I come in today as a community leader, professional mom, and also a CLC member, I also want to set the stage for a little bit of my background as to why I'm very passionate about the work that I do. My passion for our community is deeply rooted by my ancestors. I can't help but embody their daily suffering. If I focus my lens specifically on their maternal health, I can't help but think of the intergenerational trauma that I inherited from their unimaginable voyage and bondage that even freedom they could not fathom. I can't help but think about how their pain and suffering became so normalized for all of the generations that followed, including my generation. I can't help but think about the Southern laws that forced enslaved Black women to bear children whose only value was to profit this country. And the enslaved mother's milk was the gold that fed their children while their own suffered. I shift my lens to my great-grandmother's unforeseen death. After the birth of her son, she did not receive proper medical care that her life depended on. She died shortly after because she was categorized as a Black woman. She was mixed, her mother was white, and she was not allowed to deliver in the local hospital. She was not given the compassion that a human being should receive after carrying a child for 9 months. She depended on her doctor's knowledge, experience, and sympathy to deliver her a healthy baby. But instead, my grandfather and his newborn brother, my great uncle, was left without a mom. Even up until my grandfather's death in 2019, as a 90-year young man, he would say, I wish I had more than 6 years with my mom. Or if a child went through a fit with their mother, he would say, love your mom, you only get one. I wish I could have mine back. I would have given up anything to have her here. That same grandfather allowed me to rent his property in 2010. 5 years after I graduated from college, I was in his property and he warned me, this area is rough and I want you to be cautious leaving home and coming home. And at that moment, I had an understanding behind one of the most racist questions a white person could ask me, which is, where are you from? Because if I answered that question, I would have to think about its context of what underlying details lie in that honest answer. My honest response would be College Hill, off Grand and 70, right by the water tower. where there are man-made food deserts, prostitution, community members self-medicating with drugs and or alcohol, children experiencing trauma before the age of 5. I live where the public school children are unable to read at grade level. I live in one of the highest zip codes where Black babies are dying at an alarming rate, and community members are so dependent on the same government that strategically placed them in the position that they are in. That's where I live. I didn't think of even how something so simple as my grocery shopping routine would be outside of the neighborhood where I lived, especially at the time when I decided to become vegan. There was no place in my neighborhood to get fresh fruits, vegetables. It was more like outdated, gnat infested, and very limited produce was more like it. When I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the same pyramid that dictates a human's behavior when basic physiological and safety needs are not met. As a result, you have an entire community that is only surviving and not living, and only teaching their children to survive and not thrive outside of the place that they call home. So where I live is the reason why community should be at the table for every decision that affects us. Where I live is why generational curses need to be broken. Now we are going to shift the gears to my actual maternal experience. I found out I was pregnant in 2014. I did everything a soon-to-be mother was supposed to do. I went to all of my doctor appointments. I ate right. I sung to my daughter. I played classical music because my daughter, when she was in the womb, her name is Zara, by the way, she was most active. We would also have midnight dance parties, karaoke, music, and artists we listened to was Whitney Houston, Tina Marie, Anita Baker, most of the classics. I made it my priority that my doctor note on each prenatal visit, my primary concern for giving birth was the Harrington steel rod that I have infused on my spine. I wanted him to note that so the anesthesiologist that administered the epidural would be familiar, or for the most part, be prepared with my x-rays on hand. When my water punctured at 3 a.m. on May 16, 2015, at that time, I was a single mom. I went through my pregnancy without a partner. So while I was in labor, I drove myself to the hospital. My best friend was on the phone all along the way. She kept me calm. I knew one thing. I knew that I did not want to go to the hospital that was closest to my community because I was afraid of ending up like my great grandmother or losing my child, because the lens that I see that doctor through gives me anxiety. I asked myself, can I truly trust this doctor delivering the most precious thing to me in the world? Will I get the chance to live a full life and watch my child grow? Or does this doctor just see me and my unborn baby as Negroes? As my anxiety was set high, I ascended onto 40 West from Grand. My goal, it was to get to the closest hospital in a quote unquote better zip code. So we would have a better chance of making it through, or just a better chance at having better treatment. Because as a mama bear, we are going to do whatever we have to do for our children, and that's by any means necessary. So as I got closer and closer to this community hospital with intentions on passing, my water fully broke. I had to make a quick decision. That decision was to deliver my daughter at that community hospital. I couldn't take any chances on her life. While in labor and delivery, I had discovered no notes were made of my concerns. No notes were made that I did not want resident doctors assisting with any parts of my delivery. And no notes were made for the anesthesiologist. As a result, I was stuck a total of 3 times in my spine for my epidural, and I was misstitched by the resident doctors while they were distracted while talking about their weekend plans. As I again switched gears to Flourish, all that I went through and was going through at that time, my relative invited me to a meeting with Flourish. As an activist and protester, starting back in 2014, I was told that their meetings were about real change in the community and have a community voice centered at the table. And when I learned that I could also bring my daughter Zara with me was a bonus. I walked into that meeting space with strangers that made me feel so welcome, and they made me feel that my voice had a purpose. Laura Gully is one that I do consider a mentor. She really helped mold me. She helped me elevate into a true community leader. So our group at that time was called Making Change Happen, better known as MCH. Through our experience, I learned to take the anger and confusion I had in me from the Michael Brown Jr. movement and turn it into my healthy passion. It felt comfortable in this group to talk about postpartum, in which I did not know at that time was a normal process that a woman goes through after birth. I went on to become a co-chair for PBHI, which is also the Perinatal Behavior Health Initiative. From there, a dedicated member to the CLC, which is also the Community Leaders Cabinet. In everything I was a part of, it has been and is truly a fulfilling journey. Just to mention one of the many highlights to come out of the CLC is the Black Babies Matter shirt that me and my daughter Zara, we wear those shirts so proudly in the name of our ancestors. We wear those shirts also as a visual to encourage and educate the community. And we wear those shirts as an awakening to white culture in this country, that none of this is okay, and that white privilege will no longer be the blind eye to the foundation of their ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your just dynamic story, and just kudos for just the work that you continue to do and forge forward. Next couple slides, please. I just wanted to share with you right there. Thank you so much. So why are we disrupting? Why is it necessary to disrupt business as usual? Mia's story is the reason why we can no longer continue down the path that we were going. It's significantly important that we shift courses, that we do something different, that Black women will experience something different, that will have outcomes that are significantly different. This is why it is important to make this shift from why our babies are dying to how we can thrive and flourish. Next slide, please. So what we looked at is, with Flourish, we talked about 3 primary opportunities to make lasting change for Black moms and babies. Investing in community-driven solutions. Mia can tell you, just like those that have experienced accessing services and care, challenges and barriers in their own neighborhoods and communities, the experience of not wanting to go to the nearest healthcare provider because you do not feel respected and cared for. Investing in community-driven solutions is primary to us reaching and getting over this hump and over to the other side. Mobilizing diverse partners. If you're sitting there questioning, do I have a role to play? I say, yes, you do. And we all do. It's going to take all of our gifts and talents mobilized, moving towards the same goal. And that ultimate goal was 0 racial disparities in infant mortality by the year 2033. We can do it as a region. And advocating for those policy changes, because we can, and it is necessary to have programs and services. It is just that and more important that we have sustaining change by focusing on and advocating for policies that respect and care for Black women. Next slide. So the community told us, they spoke. We asked and they said it. They identified 4 priority areas that if we do these things, these are some of the biggest challenges that Black families face when it comes to having healthy babies. Safe sleep. We're focusing on, with safe sleep, scaling up safe sleep champions, from grandmas to early childhood providers to your big mama on the corner, anyone that interfaces with babies. And we make these decisions every day of putting babies to sleep, making sure that the supports are necessary, that they're in place to distribute portable cribs, and that we have a way to distribute them and collect that data so we know where they need to go and where the need is. Social determinants of health. We just talked about social determinants of health. We're, in this regard, the community said 2 things: transportation and housing. Those 2 things directly impacted their health. So being able to access health care, so having reliable transportation was key. And where you live matters. Your environment and the physical space you live, it matters. So affordable, safe, and quality housing. And the other thing around capacity building and racial equity is really centered around equitable policies and practices that address systemic racism that are experienced, and that's the heart of some of the experiences of Black families. And then the last one, and then I have the honor of introducing our Ms. Candace, she's been so patient. Of coordinated quality care encompasses designing prenatal care models alongside and support of Black moms that provide access to quality, holistic, and culturally congruent care. And this entails through community health workers, doulas, home visitation programs, and behavioral health services for pregnant and postpartum parents. Critical for the needs of where we're trying to go. And I just want to highlight, we will be talking more about doula care. And I want to introduce Miss Candace Ward, who I also have had the pleasure of interacting with, and just love her spirit and soul. She cares about some Black moms and babies. So I'm going to kick it to Miss Candace, who will take it from here.
Thank you so very much, Laura, for that introduction. And I'll talk a little bit about myself and what I do, and just kind of open the space for that. So if we could go to the next slide. So I'm a doula, serving families in St. Louis and parts of Illinois through in-person and virtual support. My doula training was completed through Jamal Birth Village in 2018. Recently, I extended my knowledge and skills by becoming a certified full spectrum doula. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, and I have worked to normalize breastfeeding by educating and supporting families for over 10 years. I'm also a community health worker and a CHW coalition member. And of course, I'm a mother. So that's why this topic in my community is very important to me. Now, I do want to take a moment to open up the space in gratitude and appreciation for the conversation that we are having in this space. We got some heavy information today. We got a real life experience. And so, sometimes you need to take a moment to really just breathe and take in this information, because some of this is new that you may not have heard before. So although we are virtually distanced, I hope that you feel a sense of connection and that you take a piece of African American storytelling that preserves communities and families through the restorations of our misplaced traditions. Next slide, please. Today, we are taking a closer look at a group of individuals that greatly impact birth outcomes. Now, there may be several terms. They're known as birth workers, labor assistants, labor coaches, companions, health champions. I reach into my doula bag with my hands, and I nurture, provide education, resources, empowerment, tradition, life-saving knowledge. Next slide, please. By definition, doulas are non-clinical workers that are professionally trained and certified to provide emotional, physical, educational, and informal support during pregnancy, labor, and the postpartum. Although doulas cannot diagnose, provide treatment, or conduct medical testing, they possess an approach to care that honors birth and increases healthy, positive birth experiences. Many doulas acquire specialized skills to assist couples struggling with infertility issues, breastfeeding, adoption, abortion support and advocacy, or even bereavement. Full spectrum doulas typically provide these expanded services, but not all doulas serve in the same capacity. Community-based doulas focus on addressing birth inequalities in their communities where they live and where they work. Their families and children are often affected in the same ways. Community doulas are advocates and represent a safe place where Black voices are amplified and families are treated with respect. Next slide, please. Doulas provide care for birthing persons in all settings, whether it be a hospital, a birthing center, or coming into the home for a home birth. They assist with healthy or high-risk pregnancies, vaginal or cesarean deliveries, advanced maternal age, or adolescence. Doulas are versatile and essential to the maternal care team. They are not midwives. Midwives are trained clinicians that provide cervical exams or fetal heart checks, all your medical care. Doulas are they're paraprofessionals. Next slide. Now, taking a look at what we've experienced. During the past year, maternity care decisions were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Limited hospital visiting, shorter hospital durations, concerns of spreading infection, shifting hospital policies and regulations requiring social distancing led to an increase of in-home, out-of-hospital births. Midwives and doulas were the core response to the dilemma and the shift in the dynamics of the US healthcare system. Prior to the pandemic, though, the US was already facing a maternal health crisis that disproportionately affected African Americans. African American women in the United States, as you've learned from what Laura talked about earlier, they experience higher rates in maternal mortality, morbidity, cesareans, low birth weight, preterm birth, and infant mortality. Structural racism, systematic racial inequalities, and implicit bias contribute to these poor health outcomes. Now, truthfully, chronic illness, inadequate access to care, and socioeconomic factors increase the risk of birth complications. We're not denying that. However, despite the income level, marital status, education, or health factors of African American women, they are still more likely to die from pregnancy or child-related causes at a rate 3 to 4 times higher than white women. If you reflect on Mia's story, you can understand why these families are fearful of the hospital experience. In fact, I'll do you one even better. Serena Williams, a prominent woman, athlete, and mother, almost lost her life in 2018 because a provider dismissed her concerns, was not listening. Let that sit. Black voices deserve to be heard, trusted, and respected. Next slide. The National Association to Advance Black Birth created a Black Birthing Bill of Rights with the statement that Black women and birthing persons are entitled to respectful, equitable, and high quality pre- and postpartum care. The bill helps families to understand their rights while confidently expressing them to their providers. And the bill guides maternity care providers and government programs in their practices and policies. So now that you have an understanding of what doulas are, let's look into why doulas are vital in addressing maternal mortality rates. Next slide, please. Doulas are not the lone solution. However, they are a vital piece to this puzzle. During pregnancy, doula care involves education on childbirth, nutrition, infant feeding, cultural support, birth outcomes. They may discuss comfort measures and positionings. For those stressed families, they may go over deep belly breathing and meditation. They go over postpartum planning, and they answer all the questions that family may be afraid to ask their provider. They refer when appropriate. The doula builds a rapport with the family while equipping them with the confidence to address their concerns. They offer alternatives, community resources, and create a unique birth preference to improve their outcome. A doula empowers the partner to become attentive to their needs while caring for the birthing person. And if you ever get an opportunity to review some of the training and the information that comes from the doula dads, for me as a doula, being in those spaces and watching these dads be able to come into their own power and support their families in a way that they have not been given the permission to support them in the past, it is truly amazing. It is truly life-changing. Next slide, please. Thank you. During labor, doulas provide continuous support that begins with the birthing person as they go into active labor. And support looks like affirmation, respecting their wishes, comfort, creating a calming environment, nourishment. Because now I was an athlete, and anyone who knows or who have experienced birth or been in a birthing space, sometimes you get tired, you get hungry. It can be ridiculous to not nourish that birthing person in that moment because of policy. They may explain medical terminology and answer questions to make that family feel more comfortable. Continuous labor support, and this is really key, has shown to decrease anxiety, stress levels, and pain. Stress in pregnancy is associated with preterm birth. However, doulas that assist birth are 4 times less likely to have that result in that low birth weight. Another benefit to doulas is that labor times are potentially shortened and spontaneous birth occurs more frequently when assisted by the doula. And we talked about cesarean rates, and especially how they're higher among African American women. Well, those cesarean rates are decreased by 39%. A doula existing or being present in the birthing space provides stress and pain relief. Doulas provide a level of personal safety for African American patients that mistrust or fear providers and healthcare systems. Doulas know how to navigate healthcare systems and ask the questions that help birthing persons feel informed without making decisions for them. All these factors lead to patient satisfaction, and the overall birth experience improves. Next slide, please. But we don't stop there. The most neglected time, in my opinion, is the postpartum period. Sadly, maternal and infant mortality occurs most often during this period. Families are left feeling vulnerable and alone to figure it out. The reality of postpartum is that the true postpartum recovery requires 1 to 2 years. Yet the only reference to postpartum is usually associated with depression. Postpartum depression and postpartum depletion are consequences of the lack of infrastructure for extended care after birth. According to the American Psychological Association, 1 in 7 women suffer from postpartum depression. BIPOC communities suffer twice that rate. Doulas improve emotional well-being, healing, and recovery by providing holistic approaches to care. They provide nutritional resources to combat depletion. They continue to follow up after birth. They are trained to recognize postpartum complications, and they refer to mental and physical health providers. Now, I wouldn't be a lactation consultant if I did not bring up breastfeeding. Breastfeeding initiation increases with the support of a knowledgeable doula. Breastfeeding improves maternal health and reduces, let's say this again, breastfeeding reduces infant mortality by 38% for infants breastfed 3 months or more. Doulas are providing an important element in the continuity of care that is needed to close this gap. During Black Maternal Health Week, Vice President Kamala Harris hosted a White House roundtable where she mentioned that doulas were in a uniquely trusted position to help mothers. Doulas support the whole family. Family, friends, and partners are given guidance to create a sense of community or a village for mothers or birthing persons. Now, we're all familiar with the phrase, "it takes a village." African traditions have always included rituals or ceremonies that not only honored the mother, but supported her emotional and physical healing. The community shared in the caring of the mother and family throughout pregnancy and the postpartum. Now, how many of you are familiar with the term lay midwives or grand or granny midwives? Among the many enslaved African people that were brought to the US in the early 1600s, there were trained and practiced midwives. Particularly in the South, African American women preserved the traditions passed down from their ancestors. These grand midwives cared for families and delivered thousands of healthy babies under sometimes deplorable conditions, extreme challenges, and dehumanizing circumstances. Grand midwives are the pioneers in the midwifery care model that exists today. Doulas are an important aspect to this model of care because they are combating the effects of societal and structural racism that is directly related to poor birth outcomes, as we discussed today. Now, Mama Shafia Monroe, who is a midwife and doula trainer, provides this perspective. One of the darkest moments in US history was the systematic eradication of the African American midwife from her community, resulting in a legacy of birth injustice. Doulas are reframing Black maternal health by reclaiming our African American traditions, providing care that is culturally congruent, obtaining skills to competently support birth and postpartum challenges, and advocating for reproductive rights and justice. I am grateful to be called along with my fellow doulas, some that I know are listening today and on this call with us, because I know that they are changing the landscape for our children and for our legacy. I appreciate you allowing me to come into this space and share my experiences as a doula and really give you the information about what we do, because it is important.
Thank you so much, Candace, for sharing your presentation with us. And thank you, Mia and Miss Laura. I just want to say first, thank you to you all for sharing both like your stories and giving us the history of how we got here and what we can do to move forward. I want to say like just a personal piece of background. I first met Miss Laura in like 2018, and I was just like young and like, how do I get engaged with this work? And she encouraged me to actually become a doula. And one of the misconceptions about being a birth worker is that you have had to give birth yourself. And so just seeing how Flourish is empowering people, people who have been through either traumatic or not perfect experiences, birthing experience, or people who have never birthed before, but we all recognize that there is a problem and there's an issue with how things are going so far. So I just wanted to ask, open up to Q&A and start a brief panel discussion before we get to our patrons' questions. And I wanted to ask Candace, Mia, and Laura, what compelled you all to get engaged firsthand? What do you think was that impetus, or what moment in history were you reading about, hearing about, that made you want to get essentially on the front lines? We can start with Ms. Laura.
Great question. I often ask myself, how did I end up here? But I really think it started at home. When I think about the values of what family means, y'all, I come from a really big family. And if they listen, then they know it is all about family. And I have to tell this story, you all, really quick, that I am originally from Omaha, Nebraska. Yes, there are Black people in Omaha, Nebraska, but I moved here with my husband in St. Louis, and this is almost 20 years ago. I know this because my son is 19. And it was when I first moved here, I was so homesick. And I asked my family, or asked my dad actually, he is one of 10. I have lots of cousins, lots of female aunties, just family. And I asked him, if I asked them, would they come visit? He says, yeah, sure, ask them. I had 21 women in my home over this time period that I found out that I was carrying my first child. And the experience of being with your family is second to none. And so much so, we made it a tradition that we do every other year. We find a city, we're going to someplace and we're going to have a girls' weekend. So that tradition of what family means and a value, that stuck with me. And when people are able to see that genuineness care, that you care about more than just them sitting in a seat somewhere or them showing up to a meeting, but then no, you care about them and their family, who they are as a person. That means something, and I just took that with me everywhere I go. So that's how I show up, and that's how I interface with community and the people that interface with me. They said, Laura, we come to your office and we get lost. We talk all day long. That's the feeling. It's about relationships, and that's important to me. So yeah, that's kind of how it came a roundabout way into this work.
Mia, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. I would have to say the beginning irons in the fire was during the Michael Brown movement in 2014. For me, just watching and witnessing a heightened level of frustration and anger and for the injustice, and it brought a wider lens on not just St. Louis, but what's been going on across this country. Yeah, that was what fueled the fire, and two, few people know that during the time that I was protesting, that was the time that I was pregnant, and I didn't know that I was pregnant, and just being out there and getting tear gassed and shot with rubber bullets. It was, I mean, it hit differently when I found out I was pregnant. I'm like, I got to pull myself out of this, because when you are in a movement that was at that magnitude, you know what type of psychological and mental distress that it does to your mind and body. And I knew at that time that I could not risk that, especially with carrying a child. So I had to pull myself from the front line. And yeah, I would have to say that would have to be the beginning of what fueled my fire to do this.
And I'll just jump right in there. For me, I love that. I feel like everyone started, really with motherhood. It's like, oh, I found out I was pregnant, but it was at the right time where we had those maternal instincts. My kind of shift more into the birth and the postpartum came from breastfeeding advocacy, because as a mother, or during my pregnancy, that was when I made the decision, or really I made the decision years before that I would at least try to breastfeed. I wanted to learn more about it. And that led me to be more of an advocate, because I wanted to encourage more women that looked like me, and women who didn't know anything about, breastfeeding and all the benefits. And then moving from there, really introduced me to this birth culture and midwifery and doulas. And I actually was I visited Jama because I was going to talk about some partnerships between, I work for Affinia, also I have a lot of hats, but I work for Affinia Healthcare and the WIC department. I wanted to look into what were these amazing things that were happening in the community with Black women, and really walked away from those conversations like, oh, now I'm going to be a doula. I need to advocate in another way. So that really is how I got on this journey to supporting families in this way.
I think that's so interesting, like what you said, Candace, about like being connected through motherhood, because one of my first, and actually how I met Miss Laura was during like the mice infestation in Clem Peabody, and how the mothers were going down to the St. Louis Housing Authority to be like, our kids, like we don't have safe sleeping arrangements. We like maternal and infant mortality rates were going up in that neighborhood, and just seeing like how mothers came together, and then like leaning on Miss Laura to figure out, okay, like as someone who felt powerless, okay, how do we move forward, and what is like the road plan? So I want to ask now, where do you see the most crucial spot in, or like the most pivotal point of how you see us moving forward? Where do you see the most change that needs to occur, either within our community or within any systems that we're working with?
I'm gonna jump in here, just because I think the nature of what we're talking about, if we could just point to one thing and change that and have the kind of outcome that we are seeking, then we would do it. It is because it is a multitude of things that need to happen. And I'm talking about things from, you know, that have been long standing, reinforced disinvestments in communities. That when we look at the outcomes, you can point a finger and say, well, it's those Black women, it's those Black families. And if we look at the environment in which our Black families experience education, low opportunities for quality, I'm going to say livable wages, access to quality, I would say quality schools, because we that is so vital important, quality foods, health and nutrition, in places that are safe in your own environment. When you say, okay, you should be exercising, get the exercise, when it's difficult to walk outside your own house and fear, you know, what is around you. Those things are the realities of disinvestment. And until we really address those things that are creating the conditions, whether we're talking about the physical environment at Clinton Peabody, where you had multiple systems that were failing people, and years of not responding in action, that had detrimental impacts on our community, that was just being thrown away to the wayside. So when we talk about listening to those voices of those that experience this, that is part of the solution. When you can say, this is the experience that we've had, because then you can say, and what do we need to do to fix it? How can we address those concerns that you're experiencing? We've had folks that say, you know what, we have transportation services through our insurance plans, but they won't come to our neighborhoods. Now, that system is not working to serve those that they're designed to serve. And then we say, well, they weren't designed to serve us. So when you ask that question, it is a layered response that I have from looking at the services and practices and policies and systems that we experience, that we need to look at and really integrate. You just listen to Black women. Ask a Black woman what she needs, and she will tell you. So I could go on and on. So I'm gonna pause there. That's a start.
And this makes me think about, Candace, a little bit, that you talked about like the traditions. Can you speak a little bit more about the bringing over of enslaved people from Africa to what is now the United States, and what the transformation of midwifery practices, what happened in between that time, just to give our patrons also another historical piece of that?
Right. Well, of course, you know, when we think about when you don't have autonomy, you know, over your body and over your choices, right? So the first thing we have to remember is that people that were brought over had knowledge, that they were herbalists, you know, that they were more than, you know, there were midwives, yes, there were, you know, there were scientists, there were educated people that were brought over. So of course, some of that knowledge was going to be, you know, passed on, but it also was disrupted because they didn't have that full autonomy over their choices and over their body. So when we think about like midwifery or midwives, this is a profession that will never end, because we've been giving birth since the beginning of time. And there's always been women who have been a part of the village that hold on to this knowledge, and they know how to deliver a baby safely, right? And so with the change in time, obviously we think about even just historically, like the the whole they call him the father of gynecology, like the horrors that took place on Black women in the name of science, right? Where, you know, and Laura touched on that a little bit earlier, where anesthesia, just to be clear, was available during that time of experimentation. They chose not to use it, and they continued to experiment on these women repeatedly, not just once, you know, but several times without anesthesia. So if you can just think about the trauma that's being carried in the womb from these things that have happened to us historically, you know, in America, we had a group of women who carried the knowledge of birthing, and they were able to you know, practice a lot in the South. You know, they were, you know, known as the granny midwives, but we call them grand midwives because we want to give them that respect. But even during that time, what was happening was they were delivering these babies, and they had all of these circumstances and these you know, all these systems that were weighed against them. But even when they would step into a situation, they knew just what to do to support these families. And it was not until where midwives were criminalized, and they were no longer allowed to practice. And then what we saw was that when Black birthing people were starting to deliver in the hospital, then we saw this mortality rate increase. And it's crazy, because if you think about where scientific advances were, you know, from today compared to where they were then, the very fact that we are standing here and saying that Black women are birthing in hospitals and dying at this higher rate than what they were even back when, you know, before we were, we had these midwives. The moment we stepped into the hospital, what I'm trying to say is the moment we stepped in the hospital is where we started to see these disparities, and they have continued. So the point is being that disruption in our tradition and our model of care, we are not, you know, our care should not be a singular, just going in, barely, you know, seeing a provider. They don't get an opportunity to really touch on the emotional aspects and the mental aspects and our day-to-day life. There's no connection. When you look at the American healthcare system, you go in and you're taught, if anybody who's a clinician, you're taught to kind of be at a distance, you know, from your patients. Whereas midwifery care, you went in, you knew the family, you know, you knew what sort of things to support them. You knew if they were dealing with, you know, some mental things, you were providing these resources. So when we no longer had that wraparound care, you know, this is when our, you know, those mortality rates begin to increase, you know, from us. So what we are really, especially with doulas and those ones, especially you know, midwives, the color of Black midwives, you know, they're really trying to take a step back and stay claim on these traditions that were taken away from us, that we were made to feel ashamed, you know, in practicing then, when the reality of those practices is that we were saved. Our ancestors were saving lives. And so we want to get to that place where we're able to save those lives today. And like Laura said, but we need to be listening to Black people. We need to be listening to Black voices and Black women in order to really make a change in the system.
Can I also add something? So Candace, you just spurred some thoughts here around the community has spoke. When Flourish asked the community those questions around what would it take to thrive and flourish for Black families to experience something different, and they've elevated the things that were most vital to that outcome. Not how can we prevent these things from happening? No, how can we shift this conversation to not just surviving, but thriving? And we want to understand, what is the optimal health look like? What does vitality look like? If these things exist in our communities, how would that look? So those core priorities that the Flourish community leaders, like, they elevated up to say, hey, we need safe environments for our kiddos. We need transportation that works. We need safe, affordable, quality housing, group prenatal care, another way to wrap around that support and provide that connection and really minimize the isolation. We want doulas to help bridge that gap and help advocate and communicate with us. Community health workers, which providing that anchoring, that link that is necessary to navigate all of the many social determinants of health that our families experience that have that level of stress, because I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to take care of my bills and be a nurturing and present family and take care of myself, so that I'm healthy and my babies are healthy. So there's so many pieces to that, but the community spoke. They've shared with us, invest in these things, develop policies to advocate for these things. So yeah, we have it. We have to implement it.
And to follow up on that, what do all three of you say to someone who's like, okay, where do I start? Maybe I'm a mother, I've already had my kids, or maybe I'm not a mother or not expecting. Where do I start? Where do I get involved?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'm gonna kick that one to Mia, because there's multiple ways to lock in. I mean, just like now when you said, okay, what can I do? I want to get involved. Yeah, put our information in the chat. Contact me. I will help you get connected and linked. And we have a project, a 360 doula project. Maybe you're interested in, how do I learn how to become a doula? Go to the website, jamavillage.org. Sign up. If you're, hey, that's not my, okay, well, that's fine. Everybody has a role. And I want to say this, if you don't hear anything else, dads, men, critical. We're never meant to be separated. Part of the thing that makes Black communities work is we work together. Like, we support and have each other's back. That is critical. And again, I think back to how the values that I was raised on was, we took care of one another. And that's what we have to do. We have to get back to that.
So I would have to piggyback off of Laura. Like, that is the truth of getting connected, even just moving throughout your community. One thing I didn't realize until I actually looked, that there are different cohorts and groups and things that are in, even where I'm from, College Hill, that there were different coalitions there that I could be a part of, and being a part of Flourish. Like she said, it opens up different avenues to what are you passionate about. So one piece may be the advocacy, or another may be that you want to lobby, or you want to, policy change, or the doula. Like, I can call Laura and be like, Laura, like, this is what I'm interested in, and she will provide me that resource and the name and the person that's over the organization. Tell them I sent you. It really just depends on where your passion lies within the community, because you talk about systematic racism. It's like an octopus arms. Like, there are so many different areas of systematic racism, and it's just really, where does your passion lie in that pool?
And if I were to add to that, I would say that it starts with family. Whether you decide to go and advocate because maybe that's not your wheelhouse to move in that direction, or to be a community health worker, or maybe you don't want to necessarily go through the doula training, or, once again, that may not be your wheelhouse. But what we can do is look at our families and look at ways that we can support each other, and specifically around birth, around the birth of a child, because I think that what I have witnessed over the years is that because we have this historical trauma, that birth has become this very like solemn, and it's not a joyous, celebration within our families. And so here we already have someone who's carrying a life, who has all of these things stacked up against them. And then within their family, it's not a joyous occasion. It's not a moment to be celebrated. So we have to go back to celebrating birth and remembering that it doesn't take much to say an encouraging word to someone who is pregnant, or even just your family member. Make it a start. Speak life into your children, speak life into your parents, doing all these things that are very simple and very practical. Like, if you know that there's someone who needs, some support, just step up, ask them what they need, listen to them, take their word for it, and just do it. If I was not a doula, I'm still a mother. There's still people in my family that are giving birth. And so instead of me going in and focusing on the baby, I need to focus on that mother, because she's the very foundation of whether or not that baby is going to be healthy, and whether they're going to thrive, and whether or not her family and her partner, she has a partner, including them as well, because she needs a whole village. And so me bringing a meal, me being encouraging, me handling some of the load, that's what we need. We need to go back to the village mentality of supporting our families and supporting our community. We should know each other. We should know the ways that, the next person needs support and help, because it's very easy to disassociate yourself from the problems and from supporting another person if you don't know them, and if you don't know their story. You find out, oh, your story is similar to mine. Those mothers stepped up because they said, hey, we share a similar story. We may have differences, but we're all mothers. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves, like, hey, we're all a community. We're all dealing with the same, generational trauma. We're dealing with some of the violence and the stress, and we see this on a day-to-day. How can we support each other? So that would be my piece to add to that. It doesn't take much just to be supportive and step up in a way, even if those other areas are not your wheelhouse.
Candace, what would it look like if we were celebrating babies, the birth of a baby? Celebrating, partying, this is something that's additive to our community. And I know there are ancient traditions that have done that welcome. They stand by and they wait for the baby to arrive, because they can't that is a joy. It's something that what would it look like in our community to do that for Black families?
So here's the amazing thing that I've gotten an opportunity to witness with all of these ones that are going through the doula training, because not everyone is going into doula training to, work with other families. We have a lot of people that are coming in, and especially these men that are coming in that are saying, I just want to support my partner. And I had this beautiful experience with Mama Pam, if you watch it, because she is an elder, she is truly an elder. And she went through the training to be a doula because she wanted to support her granddaughter. And she said, I can't believe I didn't know about these things. And she felt responsible that she didn't, that these traditions were not passed along. And so just her being in this class, learning about her tradition, it was so powerful. It was so moving for her. She said, I need to teach others my age. I need to remind them about what we used to do. And so to see people come along and learn and be able to, say, what, now I know those traditions. I know what the birth ceremony looks like. I know what postpartum support looks like. It's not just, oh, they just had a baby and let me come see that baby and bring some clothes and, go over the house and eat, and don't bring a meal and don't help out. It's reframing how we view each other. And so I talked with another young lady that just completed the doula training, and she said that you know, her niece found out that she was a doula, and she said, I need you to help me with my birth. I need you to support me. And so just by her, you know, being a doula, and family members now knowing that, they're like, oh, they're running to her, like, because I know you got the knowledge, you know, you have the tradition, like you know what to do. So it is really honoring. It is changing our frame of thought. You know, I've seen people come in, and sometimes the circumstances surrounding the birth may not be as joyous as what you know. There are circumstances where they're not joyous, but what we need to look at is what the support is like. Like, I've sat and watched a mother sit next to her teenage daughter who is not, you know, who really wasn't competent enough to answer the questions, but she was there because she was like, I need to support her. It was not the mentality of, oh, well, I did it, I'm okay, we birthed that way, you know, and you know that. So we have to change that. We have to, you know, when you hear of someone in your family and they're pregnant, you simply just say congratulations. You simply put together a ceremony where you can honor the mom so that she feels important, that we can touch back onto those traditions. And even if it's just like we get together, we eat food, you know, or now it might be virtual, it might be outside, you know, social distancing, but it's just to pour intentions that we want to see you succeed. That's what, in my opinion, what that support would look like in birth, that we change that whole negative idea, that we have to unpack that trauma, those initial feelings, to be like, oh, this baby up. No, we have to be reminded that we used to celebrate it, that our people would not speak bad intentions on a pregnant, you know, woman, because they didn't want her to be stressed. They didn't want her to lose her baby. So if we, from those past generations, were able to have that much insight to support each other, we can do that today. We can do it today. Talk to the people in your family that want to support. And then sometimes you have to remove some of the negativity, you know, as well. You have to remove those ones that maybe they're not on the same, you know, line of thought and not on the same accord. Remove those folks for the time being, because we need you to survive. We need your baby to survive.
And I think what you mentioned is so important about how we're not continuing the traditions that are so helpful to us, especially considering I don't think a lot of people think about how stress can be passed down from generation to generation. And so if we understand that stress, like simple stressors, everyday life stressors, can be passed on from generation to generation, then just imagine with the trauma of racism, slavery, bondage, all of that, how much that can be amplified by being passed down from generation to generation. And then for the removal of our traditions on top of that, I think it just makes it so much more crucial to return to what has gotten us through this journey and not lose sight of that. So that's just what I wanted to mention, and see if you guys had any thoughts on that. And if anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A button or the chat button just as we're getting ready to close.
And I'll just add that I really appreciate Ms. Candace being here to amplify the voice that took us back to our ancestral period. And that's something that when we think about us as Black people, African Americans, that's not a time that we operate from, because there's so much going on and so much that we are literally like trying to get under control. But you know, systematic racism is in a whole is tough to tackle it, because as I said, you know, it has so many different arms to tackle. But thinking of it in that perspective, that historically the slaves that came here, just thinking of it in that way, that they did have titles, that did have an importance, and they had a role in their community. So, so thinking of it in that way, and I always say that as a community, the only way that we will really see the change that we desire to see is for us to do it ourselves. That is the only way, and we can't wait for some magical bill or some magical law to drop down from the sky. Once we do the work ourselves, and we are the ones that are in the forefront of that work, it shifts. I know there'll be a shift. I mean, even in that sense of the doulas, that as a community member, you can be a doula. I mean, there could be a neighborhood, a community of doulas that even holds the providers accountable when it comes to the healthy births of, our babies. And yeah, so when I just being in this space today, that is something that I will take with me in that course of the way that you spread it.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you to Mia, Candace, and Miss Laura. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to have been able to occupy this space with you all, and I'm thankful for everyone who tuned in tonight. If you're interested and you're watching in supporting MHS through membership, we would be so grateful to have your support. Please copy the link that I have for membership in the chat and paste it to your browser. Your feedback is always important to us. We would really appreciate if you would take our short survey. A Kobo Toolbox survey should have opened in one of your browser tabs, so keep an eye out for that when we end this session. If you enjoyed this evening's program, please visit mohistory.org for more information on our upcoming STL History Live series. Also really excited to announce for our African American History Initiative, our next program is our Juneteenth celebration, and that will be an in-person event, socially distanced on our front steps, the north side of the History Museum, and there will be music. So please come out if you're interested in celebrating Juneteenth in person. So I just also want to give one last thank you to our guest panelists this evening. And please, if you're interested in finding out more about Flourish, please visit their website. Please hit up Candace if you need any birth work, doula service. So just thank you to you all for participating tonight.
Thank you.